Hi guys, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Holly. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate that. Today we are going to have a conversation about Barry and Honey Sherman. It's unsolved double murder case from Toronto. Very unfortunate. It's a very unique case in itself, and mostly because the way that the murders were committed is unusual. Sherman case is pretty well known. When it happened, it made international news, and that was because of, who they were socially and in the business world. We're going to start off with Barry Sherman. So he was born February 25th, 1942 in Toronto to Herbert Sherman, who was part owner of a zipper company, and Sarah Sherman. His grandparents from both sides had fled persecution of Jews in Russia and Poland. Sherman's father died from a heart attack when Barry was 10 years old. So right off the bat, he's losing a parent, and he comes from a time when he more or less, I guess, became the man of the house, took on some manly responsibilities. In 1958, Barry worked for his uncle's company, Empire Laboratories. It was then Canada's largest pharma company, and that was in Toronto. In 1965, Uncle Louis Winter passed away. And 2 weeks after that, his aunt passed away, leaving their children, which would be Barry's cousins, as orphans. So Barry's uncle and aunt passed away under suspicious circumstances. I didn't delve too much into that part of it. They died 2 weeks apart. In 1967, Barry Sherman completed his PhD in astrophysics and engineering. His uncle's estate allowed him to buy a majority stake in Empire Pharma, giving him control. So he had a majority. It was upon the condition that his cousins, at the age of 21, the children of the departed uncle and aunt, be given jobs with the company and 5% stake. So Barry did not keep this promise. But over the years and later on in life, definitely when the Winter children were adults, he gave more than $50 million to them over time to develop careers, start their own businesses, etc. So he did not stick with that clause within the estate of his uncle, but he was still giving them money. Barry married Honey in 1971. A fellow University of Toronto graduate of Austrian nationality, who was the daughter of Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors. The couple had 4 children together, a son Jonathan, and 3 daughters, Lauren, Alexandra, and Kaylin. Barry Sherman founded one of Canada's largest generic drug companies, and it was called Apotex, in which Forbes magazine estimated to be valued at more than $3 billion when he passed away. And that would make Mr. Sherman the 12th wealthiest man in Canada at the time of his death. Apotex was a multinational powerhouse in the world of generic drugs. The brand pharmaceutical companies despised Barry. For obvious reasons, they were cutting into their profits. So although Barry was very, very successful, he made a lot of enemies along the way. Apotex was the first generic pharma company to create a generic form of Valium, and some of the other bigger names, medications, and that was the first in Canada to do that. Honey served on the boards of several charities and was well known for her philanthropic work. She was considered more outgoing than her husband, who was a workaholic, and many interviews with people who worked with Barry Sherman said he was just always there. First one in, last one out. Always, he was committed to that business. The couple were major donors to the United Way and gave $50 million to the United Jewish Appeal and other Jewish charities, even though Barry considered himself an atheist. On December 15th, 2017, Barry and Honey Sherman were found dead in their Toronto home. The cause of death was strangulation. In technical terms, it would be ligature neck compression. Both were found hanging with men's belts around their neck on a railing beside their indoor pool, which was located in the basement of their home. Their home had been for sale. They were discovered by their real estate agent, who had let themselves in with a key they left outside of the home for their use. So there was a key out there for the real estate agent to let themselves in if they wanted to show the home. Barry and Honey were selling that home, and they had made plans. Actually, they were meeting with a developer quite often, and they were just making this fabulous mansion with 2 pools and with, double the bedrooms, double the kitchens. Like, it was tennis court and everything. The poor real estate agent was the one that found their bodies. The police were called immediately. The deaths were treated as suspicious, and the Toronto Police Service Homicide Squad took the lead in the investigation. So, of course it's suspicious. 2 of them murdered at once. It's right off the bat a unique situation. So, Toronto police had previously told the news media there was no indication of forced entry into the Sherman home, and that their investigation did not include a search for any suspects, initially deeming it a murder-suicide situation. So this was a big deal when this came out. Nobody believed that it was a murder-suicide, and just the way that it was done, it would be near impossible for that to work. They caught a lot of flack for that. It was a very rushed investigation, almost as if they were just sort of trying to get through it, and they figured they could put out this one narrative to the public and that would be accepted. But I remember it happening at the time too, and it was just very suspicious immediately. Like, it didn't sort of fit the crime that it would be a murder-suicide situation. And you never got that vibe from them as a couple anyhow. Honey suffered face injuries, and Barry did not. So apparently that's what was fueling the police speculation that it was Honey was the victim, Barry was not the victim. That brought them to the conclusion of murder-suicide, which is just absolutely... It's ridiculous that they said that. In response, anonymous sources noted that the house had several entrances and claimed that both Barry and Honey would have likely let someone in who asked for help. Upon the urging of the Sherman children, and with the help of Toronto lawyer Brian Greenspan, who is a big name in law in Toronto, for sure. So there was a second investigation, and autopsies were conducted again. The second autopsy established that the cause of the couple's death was homicide. So now they are deeming it a double homicide. In late October 2018, lawyer Brian Greenspan announced that the family had offered a $10 million reward in the couple's homicide investigation for any information that leads to the arrest and prosecution of a suspect. So $10 million, that's a lot of money. They were getting tips. Nothing substantial that would contribute to the case or lead to an arrest. $10 million is a lot of money. Is it that really nobody knows what happened? I'm just surprised that there wasn't more people that have come forward, or someone who knew something would come forward for $10 million. So the reward at the time was $10 million, but as of last December, the reward for information leading to an arrest is $35 million, which that must be the highest reward I've ever heard, at least in Canada. So $35 million reward, and still nobody is coming forward. The Sherman home didn't have any security. There were no security cameras on the grounds. They didn't have dogs. They didn't have guards. And these were billionaires, and very, very well-known billionaires. And Barry was also very controversial. And no security whatsoever. There was one camera set up apparently, and that was at the pool area inside the home, which was actually where the crime was committed. But at that time, that camera wasn't working. So such a shame. I mean, imagine. So by October 2018, police had obtained 37 warrants related to the investigation. On April 25th, 2019, so you'll see the case has been going on for quite a long time. A lot of long stretches of not a lot happening. So April 25th, 2019, the Toronto police said they had a working theory of the case and an idea of what happened. So, okay, this is the thing with the Toronto police. Since the beginning of this investigation, they haven't wanted the public to know a lot about what's been happening. In particular, the media. What are they hiding? Like we've seen this in other cases too. We haven't done that many podcasts, but there is a trend here of police dropping the ball or having something to hide. And this case actually really brought that to light, because this was a big failure for the Toronto police. Major failure. So a few years later, actually 3 years later, Toronto police said the case was unfortunately old. It's still in the investigation phase. No charges have been filed against anyone. The Toronto police asked the court to seal case documents from the press to protect the integrity of the investigation. So here we go again. They do not want details getting out there. So that sort of makes me think sure, it might be to protect the investigation, but given what we know already about police, there was something that they were hiding about themselves in there. Absolutely. I wanted to mention that while I was doing research, I came across an article that talked about an urban explorer. So urban explorers is sort of like what we do with Abandoned Ontario, but there's many different levels to it. So there's, sort of the mild ones like Danny and I, what we do. There's the extreme ones that will actually go into buildings, scout out places. We don't try to trespass. But anyway, this particular urban explorer who's in the Toronto area was watching the Sherman home. So what they were doing was they noticed that there was cameras installed on the property. And one day they noticed the cameras were gone. So they thought, okay, this is my chance to get in there. So they did go in the home. I think there was a window that was open or left unlocked. They went into the home. They looked around the home. Now, I didn't see the evidence of it. This urban explorer talks about it on many platforms. It's definitely out there. You could totally look it up. Apparently, what the urban explorer saw was things that seemed to hint to certain people possibly involved with the murder, or people they were last in contact with. Even an address book, which that seems like something you would think the police or the investigators would have grabbed right away, because it basically has everyone they've been in contact with for who knows how long. So they said they claimed to find an address book. They didn't take anything, but they took pictures of things. This urban explorer also went into, they were heading toward the room with the pool in it where the incident happened. But they couldn't. They said it was just had some darkness to it, so they didn't really go there, but they sort of briefly looked around the home. Coincidentally, the day after that urban explorer went through the home was demolished. I should also mention that the urban explorer said that there was furniture left in the home, which I thought was very, very strange. You figured the family or, friends of the family would have moved out all the furniture, but there was furniture and apparently clothing. But that also means maybe possible evidence is gone as well. I figured they would have left the home there until the investigation was done, or they had their suspect, or just a little bit longer, but they just totally demolished it and everything in it and just buried it away. So now we'll just get into some of the facts and maybe a few of the suspects in the case. Barry, he was a tough man. He made a lot of enemies along the way, but that is it's certainly natural in the business world. He was well loved, but also hated by some very dangerous people and very powerful corporations. So the couple made numerous multi-million-dollar donations to hospitals, schools, charities, had buildings named in their honor. They hosted Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at a Liberal Party fundraiser in 2015. The Shermans gave millions to their children and other relatives, and Barry invested heavily in schemes that often didn't pan out. So he was very, very successful with Apotex, but he had a diverse number in varying areas of investments where he lost a lot of money. In 2011, Barry's cousins, the Winter children, so that was the children of the uncle that passed away, sued him for allegedly never paying them royalties and equity in Apotex. They were saying that he used the proceeds from the sale of Empire Laboratories, so that was his uncle's business, to buy Apotex. So the cousins sought 20% interest in Apotex, or damages of $1 billion. So he sold Empire Laboratories before these kids turned 21 years of age, therefore basically striking out the contract. So he didn't keep his promise to them, but also he sort of double-crossed them where he sold the company anyway, so they wouldn't even have had a chance at a job at the age of 21 or their 5%. So he did them wrong. Although he, like I said, he did give them money, but still that was not very nice. Not very nice. So they sued him. They figured, okay, so proceeds were taken from our father's business and put into your business, so we should be getting 5% of that business. Barry responded by withdrawing millions of dollars in financial assistance to his cousins. In September 2017, Ontario Superior Court of Justice ruled against the cousin, all of the cousins, saying the case was wishful thinking and beyond fanciful. At the time of the judgment, a lawyer for the cousins said they would appeal, although no appeal occurred, and Barry had passed away a few months later. So the cousins, they had to pay him money. They had to pay his court fees. They lost everything. So even they had to repay him any money that he gave them over the years. The court ruled that they had to pay that back to him. So how the judge saw in his favor, I don't know. In all fairness, he broke a contract with the estate of his uncle. So, you know what? He's got some mad cousins. And the cousins did become suspects in his murder. By now, they've all been cleared. There was one cousin in particular, and his name was Kerry Winter. And he was so upset by what happened in the court. He said he had fantasies about killing Barry. And he made this sort of publicly known. He was kind of telling people. And even he was interviewed by the Fifth Estate, the investigative journalism program I mentioned in the last podcast. And he said, yeah, I fantasized about killing Barry after that. He was so devastated by what Barry did. He said, and it was very, very graphic what he wanted to do to Barry. But there was no doubt that Kerry was the suspect, but later cleared. So the cousins, although all of that happened, all clear, no longer suspects. Apotex itself, the company, were no strangers to lawsuits. So at the time of Barry's death, the company had filed an estimated 1,200 cases against the government in federal court. This is aside from the hundreds of cases involving brand pharma companies such as Bayer. Barry himself acknowledged the long-running conflict between Apotex and major pharmaceutical companies over drug patents. He's even quoted in interviews saying, "The branded drug companies hate us. They have private investigators on us all the time. The thought once came to my mind, why didn't they just hire someone to knock me off? Private investigators working for the German company Bayer, one of the world's largest drug companies, reportedly considered planting illegal drugs in Barry's car. So they wanted to get him busted, wreck his reputation, possibly get him some prison time. So they were going to plant, whatever pounds of cocaine in his trunk, and it got worse than that. Something I'm not going to mention, but something that could definitely ruin your reputation. And that was Bayer. So this is a cutthroat business. Yikes. Only days before he died, Toronto billionaire Barry Sherman was attempting to quash an investigation into a political fundraiser he held for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that allegedly ran afoul of lobbying rules. So this is where the Prime Minister comes into it. Not that we're saying the Prime Minister did it himself, but it is not that far out there to think that possibly a politician could hire somebody to take care of people if it meant protecting their position. The Lobbyist Code of Conduct prohibits registered lobbyists, such as Barry and Apotex, from lobbying office holders they helped to get elected, as he had raised a lot of money for the Liberal Party and in support of getting Justin elected. it's important to note, speaking of Trudeau, that on December 13th, 2017, the day Barry and Honey Sherman were found murdered, Justin Trudeau had both the lobbyist commissioner and the conflict of interest and ethics commissioner removed and appointed new ones. So coincidentally, on the day that their bodies were found, Trudeau was doing some shady stuff behind the scenes. So, yeah, it sounds like a conspiracy, but maybe. A conviction for violating the Canada Elections Act Section 502 meant Justin Trudeau would lose his seat in the House of Commons for accepting a prohibited gift or other advantage. So according to documents released by the court in January 2022, Barry owed $1 billion to other companies leading up to his death, which he said he was not going to pay. Furthermore, the documents revealed the estate of the Shermans is somehow part of the murder investigation. So it's getting very close to home. And that's the whole debate about this. Was it business related or was it personal? Evidence suggests it could go either way. So speaking of the estate, someone close to Honey mentioned that 3 weeks before the murder, Honey was making changes to her will. After the murder, there wasn't a will in existence for Honey. And I've read this a number of times. She just didn't have a will. And of course, I guarantee 100% that she definitely would have had a will. What happened to the will? We don't know. But they are investigating sort of the estate side and seeing who's tied into the estate. And, we're not going to know because they're being very secretive with this investigation. In November 2020, the Toronto police said they had identified a person of interest. Then 2 days later, clarified that it could be one person or multiple people. So again, Toronto police isn't saying much. On December 14, 2021, Toronto police released a security camera footage of a suspect. It was roughly a 20-second video of a person dressed in dark clothing. They can be seen walking down the sidewalk on a snow-covered night in the neighborhood. The timing of the individual's appearance is in line with when we believe the murders took place. Based on the evidence, we are classifying this individual as a suspect, and I will either put a picture or a video here for you to see if you haven't seen it. To me, when I look at the picture and look at the video, it just seems like a person just walking down the sidewalk. It doesn't look like he's even looking at the house or acknowledging the house at all. So, this was taken from a camera. It was a neighbor had a camera set up, and this is where the footage come from. Court documents released in January 2022 included statements by Honey Sherman's sister Mary, who suggested the person responsible for the murder was making a statement, and that she believed the motive for the killings might have been religion. The Shermans were strong supporters of Israel, and Honey was very vocal about being Jewish. And of course, Canada does have a history. It still happens these days of racial or religious driven violence and murder. You see a lot of that, and it's very, very sad. Attacking and defacing temples and whatnot. It is quite possible that it was driven by religion. And also given the fact that they were both taken, I feel like if somebody just wanted to get back at Barry, or if it was a bad business deal. I don't feel like the murderer would have taken both of them when they could have easily gotten Barry at work, just out and about. So I feel it was something a little bit more personal. I don't know if it involved a family member or like this where it could have been sort of, religious based. I hate crime, I guess. It's an interesting view of it, and I hope they delve into that a little bit more, because I think that's on the right track. The Shermans also apparently had dealings with the Russian mob. There's not much about that out there. Barry dealt with a lot of people. He dealt with a lot of criminals. Possible. And also seems kind of like a mob style hit, so to speak. Taking the husband and the wife. Kind of a conspiracy, but something the police are actually looking into, I believe. Another one which definitely you could see as a conspiracy is that Apotex had been working on the cure for coronavirus and like viruses in 2017. I could see pharmaceutical companies, sort of duking it out for that. It's a very interesting fact about the case. Like I said, more on the conspiracy end. I don't think it's actually being investigated, but it sure is out there. Researching, I've seen a lot of mention of Apotex itself and secrets and things that they were working on. So yeah, this is a very interesting case. I just wanted to touch on it a little bit. I didn't want to delve too deep because I just wanted to touch on some of the facts with you, and just gives you something to chew on, to think about. In my opinion, I don't see it being solved. I hope I'm wrong. Only because with such a large reward at $35 million, you'd figure somebody would come forward. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Even if you were the friend of the friend of the friend of the person who committed the crime or hired the person to commit the crime, why wouldn't you say, it was Joe Blow? If it's going to lead to an arrest and that much money, I feel like somebody would have come forward, even at the $10 million mark, but sitting at $35 million and nobody's talking, very suspicious, very unusual. The police sporadically reach out to the public about it, or the media, sort of gets a hold of something, but we'll keep an eye on it and see. Hopefully there's going to be new developments. It's very unsettling to think that the Toronto police are referring to as an old case, sort of like they're just almost like they're fluffing it off. Like it's not important anymore. It is very, very important, especially to the Sherman family, And let's get to the bottom of it, because it was such an unusual murder. Be interesting to see exactly what happens the next little while. We'll keep an eye on it for you, and we'll let you know if we hear anything about it. Anyway, thank you so much for being with me. I appreciate you. And you can think of all the clues and, just sort of imagine. But again, I don't foresee this one being solved. I think there's a lot that is gone on behind the scenes. it could be a case where it's just so big and it would be so mind-blowing. We'll never know about it. Who knows? I mean, they're already suspecting the prime minister of the country. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Anyway, take care, everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.